Now a man named Lazarus was sick. He was from Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. This Mary, whose brother Lazarus now lay sick, was the same one who poured perfume on the Lord and wiped his feet with her hair. So the sisters sent word to Jesus, "Lord, the one you love is sick." When he heard this, Jesus said, "This sickness will not end in death. No, it is for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it." Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was for 2 more days. And then he said to his disciples, "Let us go back to Judea." "But Rabbi," they said, "a short while ago the Jews there tried to stone you, and yet you are going back?" Jesus answered, "Are there not 12 hours of daylight? Anyone who walks in the daytime will not stumble, for they see by this world's light. It is when a person walks at night that they stumble, for they have no light." After he had said this, he went on to tell them, "Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I am going there to wake him up." His disciples replied, "Lord, if he sleeps, he will get better." Jesus had been speaking of his death, but his disciples thought he meant natural sleep. So then he told them plainly, "Lazarus is dead, and for your sake I am glad I was not there so that you may believe, but let us go to him." Then Thomas, also known as Didymus, said to the rest of his disciples, "Let us also go that we may die with him." On his arrival, Jesus found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Now Bethany was less than 2 miles from Jerusalem, and many Jews had come to Martha and Mary to comfort them in the loss of their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went out to meet him, but Mary stayed at home. "Lord," Martha said to Jesus, "if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But I know that even now God will give you whatever you ask." Jesus said to her, "Your brother will rise again." And Martha answered, "I know he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day." Jesus said to her, "I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live even though they die. And whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Do you believe this?" "Yes, Lord," she replied. "I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, who is to come into the world." After she had said this, she went back and called her sister Mary aside. "The teacher is here," she said, "and he is asking for you." When Mary heard this, she got up quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet entered the village, but was still at the place where Martha had met him. When the Jews who had been with Mary in the house comforting her noticed how quickly she got up and went out, they followed her, supposing she was going to the tomb to mourn there. When Mary reached the place where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and said, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in his spirit and troubled. "Where have you laid him?" he asked. "Come and see, Lord," they replied. And Jesus wept. Then the Jews said, "See how he loved him." But some of them said, "Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying?" Jesus, once more deeply moved, came to the tomb. It was a cave with a stone laid across the entrance. "Take away the stone," he said. "But Lord," said Martha, the sister of the dead man, "by this time there is a bad odor, for he has been there 4 days." Then Jesus said, "Did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God?" So they took away the stone. Then Jesus looked up and said, "Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this for the benefit of the people standing here, that they may believe that you sent me." When he had said this, Jesus called in a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." The dead man came out, his hands and feet wrapped with strips of linen and a cloth around his face. And Jesus said to them, "Take off the grave clothes and let him go." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
I've brought a new friend with me to help me with this morning's talk. So I want you to welcome my new friend. I just got him yesterday. His name's Cedric, and he's a chicken. And he's here to help us with our talk this morning. So after 3, can you say hello, Cedric? 1, 2, 3.
Hello, Cedric.
Thank you. So here he is. I think he's quite shy. He doesn't respond much. But he's not really moving around. I wonder, maybe he's asleep. Should we try waking him up? Can we try that? So maybe after 3, if I say 1, 2, 3, we can say, wake up, Cedric, in our biggest kind of wake up, it's early morning kind of voices. Like it's time to get ready for school or something like that, okay? So let's try. 1, 2, 3. Wake up, Cedric! Should we try again? 1, 2, 3. Wake up, Cedric! I mean, the man at Sainsbury's said he was fresh. I assumed that was like youth speak for really good or something. Well, I mean, he is quite cold. Maybe he's not very well. Let me just take his temperature. Three degrees centigrade. Do you think that's right? Is that the temperature of chicken supposed to be? Should we ask Siri? Hey, Siri, what's the healthy body temperature of a chicken?
Okay, I found this on the web for what's the healthy body temperature of a chicken. Check it out.
Oh, now, Siri, when we did this in rehearsal, you read it out loud. 109 centigrade. What's that in? No, that's not right. 109 Fahrenheit. That's about 40-something centigrade, isn't it? Okay, that's a lot hotter than 3 degrees. I've got a feeling, I thought about maybe taking Cedric to the vet, but I'm not sure the vet's going to be able to do much for him. I don't think Cedric needs a vet, do you? I think it's a bit late for the vet. Maybe if we'd got Cedric to the vet a bit earlier, it would have been okay. But I think Cedric doesn't need a vet. I think Cedric needs a chef. So I'll attend to Cedric later. Back you go, Cedric. There we go. There's a good lad. Right, now, we tried, didn't we, to wake Cedric up. We could have tried, Cedric was very cold, we could have tried warming Cedric up. I might do that later, using an oven. But we know, don't we, Cedric was dead. And dead things don't come back to life. No matter how much you shout at them, no matter how much you try and warm them up, death is permanent, it's final. That's what makes it so awful. And if you've ever had to say goodbye to someone like that, then you know that that just really hurts and there's nothing you can do. But Jesus says to his friends, when he's still far away, Lazarus has fallen asleep and I'm going to wake him up. A bit like we tried to do with Cedric. But Jesus knew that Lazarus was dead. But he said, death is sleep. And I'm going to wake him up. And so when Jesus went to Lazarus' grave, he did what we did for Cedric. He said, out you come, Lazarus, wake up. And Lazarus did. And as we look at our Bible story together this morning, children in Sunday school and the rest of us in here, what we're going to see is that Jesus is more amazing than we would ever have imagined. Who he is, we could never have made up. And what he came to do is so good, so mind-bogglingly good, that it's really hard to imagine or accept what Jesus came to do. Because he came to turn sleep into death, to bring dead things alive. And no one can do that. Except Jesus can do it. So we're going to stand together, we're going to sing Cornerstone. Children are going to go through into Sunday school, and the rest of us will stay here. We've been working our way through a series in John's Gospel, looking at the signs, the miracles that Jesus performs, that John calls signs. And at the end of his book, he says, look, Jesus did lots of other things. And he performed many other wonderful signs in the presence of his disciples. But these are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. And so we come to this sign of the raising of Lazarus. And we're asking, what does this show us about who Jesus is? What does this show us about what it means for Jesus to be the Messiah, the Son of God? What does it mean to have life in his name? And I suppose this story of Lazarus is a very familiar one to lots of people inside and outside the church. The idea of Lazarus as a dead person come back to life goes on in our culture. It is frequently referenced in films and TV shows and in novels, the concept of someone being like Lazarus, raised from the tomb. This passage contains famously the shortest verse in the Bible, which is only 2 words. Jesus wept. Which is, for many of us, I'm sure you've probably encountered it, has become a kind of expression of frustration for people. And you'll hear people say, Jesus wept. It's a passage with lots of familiar things. And in many ways, it's a very beautiful story. But when you look closely at it, it's a really perplexing one. And contains various things that make you sort of think, hang on a minute, that doesn't seem right. So Jesus is off somewhere at a distance. We're not told exactly where, but he's far enough to be out of reach of Jerusalem. His disciples, when he says he wants to go back to Bethany, which is only 2 miles from Jerusalem, his disciples are like, well, you sure you want to do that, Jesus? They tried to stone you in Jerusalem. Do you remember that? He's somewhere at a safe distance. And Lazarus is really sick. And the sisters send word to Jesus, Lord, the one you love is sick. And John says in verse 5 about Jesus' response to this, now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was 2 more days. It's one of those things that is just, it's written in such a matter-of-fact way, but it's actually very jarring. Lord, the one you love is sick. Well, Jesus really loved Lazarus, and he really loved his sisters, Mary and Martha, so he stayed where he was. He didn't come to help. That's perplexing, isn't it? Why would the one who, both Mary and Martha, when they see him, they say, if he'd been here, he wouldn't have died. When he's standing at the tomb and weeping, all those gathered around say to themselves, well, could not he who opened the eyes of the blind and the ears of the deaf have kept him from dying? The one who could help stays away. And weirdly, John says it's because he loved them. That's hard to make sense of, isn't it? The other thing is something that's quite difficult to translate into English. But on 2 occasions we're told, first of all, verse 33, if you're following along in your copy of the Bible, John chapter 11, first of all in verse 33, and then in verse 38, we're told that Jesus was deeply moved. Which is a sort of fair translation of it, but it doesn't quite carry the force of the Greek text, which makes it pretty clear that Jesus was furious. He was really, really angry. He was deeply moved in that way that you're deeply moved when you see someone harming your loved one. With that kind of righteous indignation and fury that makes you willing to go into battle. Jesus is furious. What's going on here? The one who loves Lazarus refuses to come to help. The one who loves Martha and Mary is full of fury at the graveside of their brother Lazarus as he mourns with them. not exactly what we're expecting. Do you remember a few years ago, every now and then the Church of England tries to be edgy. And one year they put up kind of posters of Jesus, I think wearing a crown of thorns. And it said underneath it, meek and mild, ... as if. But this is one of those passages where you think, yeah, this is not some kind of, friendly, encouraging lifestyle guru. This is someone who's withheld the help he could have given and is absolutely brimful of rage at the grave of his friend. But when you understand what's going on with those two things, I think it causes you to marvel all the more at the picture that John is trying to paint for you of who Jesus is, and at just what he means when he says life in his name. So first of all, what does this tell us about Jesus? Well, I skipped over verse 4 when he says to his friends, this sickness will not end in death. No, it is for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it. And then Jesus says, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep. This is verse 11. But I'm going there to wake him up. And his disciples say, Lord, if he sleeps, he'll get better. That's the best thing for him. It's the best thing for a sick person, isn't it? It's to sleep. They just haven't understood what Jesus meant. Jesus had been speaking of his death, but his disciples thought he meant natural sleep. So he told them plainly, Lazarus is dead, and for your sake, I'm glad I was not there, so that you may believe. Now let us go to him. There's a sense in which Jesus has allowed himself to go through pain, the pain of bereavement, out of love for other people, out of his love for his disciples. I'm glad I wasn't there. He's dead. And I'm glad for your sake. And John, I think, makes it clear that he's glad for Lazarus' sake and for the sake of Mary and Martha. He loved them, so he didn't go, I'm glad I wasn't there. I could have stopped it. But if I'd stopped it, you would not see what you're about to see. You would not learn what you're about to learn, which is a far better thing than a man simply healed at death's door. So Jesus goes to Bethany, despite the fact that his disciples said, Jesus, if you go there, you might die. And those words hang heavy in the air in John 11. He goes, and first of all, Martha comes running out, and she says the obvious thing, Lord, if you'd been here, he wouldn't have died. But I know that even now, God will give you whatever you ask. And Jesus says he'll rise. And Martha says, look, I know he'll rise at the resurrection at the last day. It's the kind of, it's almost like the sort of hopeless hope that people often express at funerals. I know they've gone to a better place. I know it'll all be okay. But there's no heart to it. Yeah, it's not much of a consolation, is it? That's the feeling. And Jesus' response isn't to say any more about Lazarus, but to start talking about himself. I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live even though they die, and whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Do you believe this? And to stress that this is like one of those really important moments in his gospel, John records Martha saying, yes, Lord, she replied, I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, who is to come into the world. What does John want you to believe by writing this book? That Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God. and that by believing you may have life in his name. Jesus says, you can have life in my name. Anyone who believes in me, even though they die, will live. And whoever believes in me will never die. And she says, you're the Messiah, the Son of God. Do you see? This is an absolutely crucial moment. This is a hinge. This is revealing who Jesus is, what he has come to do. And then she goes and gets Mary. And Mary comes back, and the whole performance is repeated. She gets to where Jesus is. She falls at his feet, says, Lord, if you'd been here, my brother would not have died. And instead of saying, that's funny, that's exactly what your sister said, Jesus just says, where have you laid him? Come and see. And he weeps. So what's astonishing is in these two encounters, you see almost two sides of Jesus. On the one hand, with Martha, the practical sister, as we know from earlier in the gospel, with Martha, Jesus is very reasoned. He's not going to stay dead. And Martha somehow, through her grief, has faith and says, well, I know that you can do whatever you say you're going to do. You're the Messiah, the Son of God. You're the one who came to bring life. I do believe that, yes. Like grimly and through the tears, but she believes it. And then he gets to Mary, and the emotions rise up. The tears spring from his eyes. He says, take me to the grave. And he gets to the grave, and once more, those emotions rise up. And he looks at the grave, and standing at the grave of his friend, he is once more furious. Furious with the sisters because of their, to some extent, faithless grief? No. Furious with God for letting this happen? Well, no, he is God and he's let it happen. Furious with what then? I think the only other actor in the scene is death. I think he is filled with indignation and fury at the imposter in God's good creation, that is death, that takes everything that is good and dissolves it, decays it, breaks it. His relationship with his friend Lazarus, Mary and Martha's relationships with Lazarus. All this grief, all of this pain played out in every town, in every country around the world, every day. It's not just Lazarus, you see, because Jesus knows he's going to see Lazarus in a few minutes. It's death itself. Because you see, death itself hovers over this whole scene. It's there in the disciples warning Jesus, really, are you sure you want to go to Bethany? Really? Last time you were there, they tried to stone you to death. And it's there immediately in what follows in verse 45. Therefore, many of the Jews who had come to visit Mary and had seen what Jesus did believed in him, but some of them went to the Pharisees and told them what Jesus had done. Then the chief priests and the Pharisees called a meeting of the Sanhedrin. What are we accomplishing, they asked. Here is this man performing many signs. If we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him. And then the Romans will come and take away both our temple and our nation. Then one of them, Caiaphas, who was the high priest that year, spoke up. You know nothing at all. You do not realize that it is better for you that one man die for the people than that the whole nation perish. This is the scene that is the background to the moment at which the high priest, the one responsible for making sacrifices, says, we need a human sacrifice. It is better for one man to die for the whole people. And as high priest, though he doesn't know it, he speaks prophetically. Jesus stands at the tomb of his friend and knows that the only way to bring Lazarus out is for him in short order to go in, to do battle with death and to win, to feel for himself death's icy grasp, to go into the pit himself. It is the only way. To bring Lazarus out, he must go in. That's the story that John is telling through his gospel. How is it that the Son of God gives life? By giving up his own. And so Jesus calling Lazarus out is also, in modern speak, Jesus calling death out. And saying, come on then, you and me, to the death. He's going into battle. He's facing the very worst that sin and death and hell can throw at him. And so what looks like a sort of easy exercise of his power, Lazarus come out, is actually a decision to plumb the depths of hell himself. To face death. To receive death. To submit himself to death. It is actually that action that in human terms seals his death warrant. It's in the aftermath of that action that Caiaphas, the high priest, says we must sacrifice him. And that is where everything heads from this moment on in John's Gospel, inexorably to the cross. I think a couple of things flow out of this for us. One is that there are times when God's answers to our prayers are just unfathomable. We can't make sense of them. It just doesn't seem right. Or how could this be? How could God let this happen? And yet, you get a little insight here in John 11 that God lets things that we can't imagine he would want people he loves to go through. He lets those things happen to us. And it must at least be believable that he does it because he loves us, not despite his love for us. That's true of Mary, Martha, and Lazarus. He loved them, so he didn't go. He loved them, so he let them go through grief, so that he could reveal to them something more wonderful than they had the capacity to imagine without going through what they went through. The pain you feel in your life, the things that go wrong, they're not necessarily a sign, I'll go further, they're not a sign that God doesn't love you. They're not a sign that God has forgotten about you or is off somewhere else doing something else and is just too busy. God's ways are not our ways. And in the end, I think the response of faith to the awful things that come into our lives, and they come into all of our lives at one point or another, the response of faith is the response of Martha, which is to say, I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, who was to come into the world. I believe that you're the Savior. I believe that you're the one who can make a difference to all of this. I don't know how and I don't know why you're letting me go through this, but I trust you. I think Martha's the model for us of how to grieve. I think it's enormously comforting, isn't it, to know that Jesus knows himself the pain of grief, that he has shed tears for those he loves, but that he's done more than shed tears. He shed his blood. I think there's a lot there for us if we're struggling. if we've been through pain. But I think there's something else. And that is what it means that Jesus has come to give life. You see, quite naturally, people are looking for a vet. They're looking for a doctor. They're looking for someone to stop the bad thing happening, to halt the disease in its tracks, to, if you'd been here, you could have prevented this from happening. That's how we work, isn't it? You can't undo the tragedy. You can't undo death. You can't unbreak someone's heart. And yet Jesus has come to do exactly that. He's not the kind of hero we expect. He's not, I think so often, the temptation for Christians is to think of Jesus as a sort of heavenly superhero. And what superheroes do is they intervene and they prevent the bad thing from happening. There is one ridiculous scene in, is it the first ever Superman film, where he makes the world spin backwards and so all the bad things that have happened get undone. But generally that's not how we think of superheroes. They're subject to some degree or another to the same laws that bind all of us, the laws of cause and effect, the fact that once something's happened it can't unhappen. And yet, in a strange sort of way, Jesus comes into the world and says, I'm not bound by those rules. I can make unhappen something that has happened. If you believe in me, even though you die, you will live. He hasn't come to lessen the effects of a fallen world. He hasn't come to prevent a few bad things from happening. He hasn't come to make your life a little bit neater and a little bit better and enable you just to cope with the awful things that come. He's come to undo it all. That's what's coming. Jesus is going to make every sad thing come untrue. So that at the end of the Bible, what does God do? He wipes away every tear. And there is no more death, and there is no more suffering, and there is no more grief. That's what Jesus came to do. And beautifully, this story shows us that that is what Jesus came to do. But it also shows us, begins to show for us, what it cost him to do that. He really loves you. He really does. And he really is able to make more of a difference to the world than you naturally want to believe that he can. He will in time unbreak your heart. And he will make dead people live, so that from this moment on, from the moment where Jesus says Lazarus is sleeping, that's how Christians come to refer to death. As sleep. Constantly in the New Testament, you read so-and-so fell asleep. They died. But their tomb was but a bed, from which one day they will rise, refreshed and whole. Isn't that extraordinary? So that the Apostle Paul, taking something of the defiant stance of Jesus at the tomb of Lazarus, can say, "Where, O death, is your victory? Where, O grave, is your sting?" They have been taken. Jesus is our mighty victor, our champion. Oh, what good news that is. Ollie's going to come now and lead us in prayer, and then we'll sing again together.